So there's a lot of opportunities, obviously, and there are a lot of things, I would say, irons in the fire, as they would say, between our country and yours. But of course, we're not the only two countries that exist in the world. There are many things going on in this part of the region that concerns the world, I think. The rivalry or the competition between the U.S. and China, for one. Of course, we have our own problems with China, with our territorial issues. But how concerned is Denmark and Europe in general about what's going on in the larger geopolitical region? Do you think it will disrupt some of these opportunities that we have been talking about?
Well, I hope they won't. The real headline here is uncertainty.
Okay.
So there's a lot more focus on the Indo-Pacific and including on the Philippines. There's a lot more focus on the Taiwan issue, on what
Sure.
China is doing, and of course how they're positioning themselves towards the US, Korea, Japan, Australia, etc. So the focus is there, and you can feel the interest in Europe for this. A lot of discussions are ongoing. Now, when it comes to the risk side, it's really about how do you manage that uncertainty that we are living with. And there are no easy answers to that.
Yes.
We have to have a very adaptive approach. But part of that approach is also, we can't just stop everything or not do anything
Sure.
because of this uncertainty. We're going to have to live with that and incorporate it into the way we sort of de-risk. So I think that surprisingly you can say, if you look at the Danish companies, what they are doing now is they're doing less China. Some are doing no China. Some are doing more careful China. Some are just doing, we'll do what we're doing in China now, but start doing more elsewhere. There's sort of different variables on that. But then they're looking also outside of China. And that will benefit, Southeastern
The Philippines, maybe?
countries, including the Philippines for sure. So this is, good news for the Philippines. Then you could ask, okay, what about the uncertainty there is if there's a big confrontation? But the reality is, if there's a big confrontation between China and the US, we're talking about global impact.
Right.
And there's no rock to hide under.
Right. Everyone's going to be affected.
Everybody's going to be affected.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be affected badly.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you put your bet on the Philippines or Indonesia or Japan or the US
Right.
or Denmark or whatever. It's just going to be very, very bad. So I think in that sense, people have become more robust. And it's very interesting to see how risk is perceived very differently, both politically but also economically.
Yeah.
So things that previously would have had a huge impact on, stock markets, and you
Sure.
could see, wild swings. And we are seeing wild swings for sure, but
Right.
for other reasons. But there's quite a lot of what I would call geopolitical robustness, because people are in the mood. Anything can happen tomorrow.
Sure.
So really when I talk to global Danish companies about geopolitical risks, what I hear them telling me is, well, we're trying to spread our risks.
I see.
Everybody's trying to spread the risks because there's no real place to hide, but you just need to make sure you're not dependent on one thing happening.
Sure.
And Philippines will be part of that equation.
Sure. You know China more than most people. You've served in that country for many years in your embassy in Beijing. How do you see things now? Are the Philippines strengthening its defense and security cooperation with the United States, and you see a knee-jerk reaction in China that also has to do with what's going on between the U.S. and Taiwan. Are you worried, or do you think that this is sort of just up to par, based on what's happened in the past? How concerned should we be now?
I think we need to be concerned because some of the language we're hearing has changed,
Okay.
and that's not good.
Okay.
China consistently says to every one of us, "Don't rock the boat."
Sure.
But I look
But
at
they rock the boat.
I look at my own country,
Yeah.
and I can just say, it's very difficult for me to see we rock the boat in any way,
Yeah.
wherever.
Sure.
But still, there's also some finger pointing going on against
Sure.
Denmark. And meanwhile, the Chinese are, becoming much more willing to come out with aggressive language or claims that just makes everybody uneasy.
Yeah.
And putting timelines, timelines are very dangerous in politics,
Yes.
because one day they'll come back to bite you, and
Yes.
what happens then? So when I was in China, it's a while ago, late 90s, and I went to talk to the Taiwanese bureau, as they had it at that time. And the feeling there was, we have time enough, as long as nobody rocks the boat. We can wait 30, 50, 100 years, whatever. Don't rock the boat. That was very important. No steps that look like recognize Taiwan as a country and all that. And I think everybody's okay with that. I really don't see anybody wanting to change that. So I do question some of the messaging we're getting from China right now. Is it really helpful? Also, seen from the Chinese perspective, you're also pushing people to reevaluate what does it mean not to rock the boat if you're sort of seeing these headwinds. So I do think that there is a heightened, I think the world thinks there's a heightened tension. It needs to be managed carefully, and hopefully the US and China can, slowly start to get down in a different height.
Yeah.
But it's not certain it's going to happen.
Sure.
We don't know it's going to happen, and we have political changes quite significant changes in China with Xi. How long time is going to be president for life or whatever. And we have political uncertainty in the US. There may be a change of government there that could be quite impactful. It's very bad to get into that, fray coming from a high friction level. Let's get that down. We all need it. And it doesn't really help anybody what's happening right now, if you ask me.
What do you make of China's proposal for a peace plan in Ukraine?
Yeah.
That seems to have gotten the attention of some people in Europe, at least the French President Emmanuel Macron. And of course, he was qualified in saying it was a good thing. But there were some other European officials who said something similar. But of course, many others are very skeptical. What's your take? Do you think there's something to it? I mean, a lot of people are not giving China credit for bringing Saudi and Iran to back into diplomatic relations. But is there something here that we should look at? China's proposal for peace in Ukraine?
I'm sure China could play a positive role, but what they've said so far does not seem to be very helpful, because there are some key elements that are missing. And we need to see other kind of language coming out from Beijing for it to be helpful when it comes to the Ukrainian crisis. And not being willing to name Russia as the clear aggressor. Already that is it doesn't work that way. You have to be clear about what is the situation, and if you're not willing to take those steps, can you then be seen as a neutral arbitrator between a country that was attacked by an aggressor, Russia? No, you cannot. You have to be clear about what is the situation. You can do that diplomatically. You don't have to go out publicly. But they have public messaging, and the public messaging is not very helpful, so it's a little difficult. Now, Macron definitely saw a geopolitical interest in keeping the door open for China to play a more constructive role. And, there can be utility in that, but the communication around that maybe was less... afforded less clarity than some people would have liked to.
Well, some people said mixed messaging, because he was talking about de-risking, at the same time bringing some 50-something odd French businessmen to China with him. So
well, the world is complex, and there are no straightforward solutions to any of these dilemmas. So communication comes with a high premium. And if you don't communicate very clearly what your intentions are, then people will draw their own conclusions. There could be misunderstandings, and I think maybe some more clarity on communication would have been helpful. From both sides. Both sides. We could also use that from the Chinese side, frankly.
But would you say that there's also some clarity needed from what Europe's position actually is with regard to China? Because as I said earlier, there are some people who are, I think the word you use is de-risking, right? And but there are others in Europe who are maybe looking at, well, maybe decoupling altogether, much more consistent, I think, with the present U.S. direction right now, which have, both have, problems with it. But what do you think is the prevailing preference in Europe? Is it de-risking, decoupling, or something else?
The prevailing answer is confusion. So we do have policies. You can look up their policy papers,
Sure.
China, Indo-Pacific, etc. But the real issue is, how do we act politically in view of those strategy papers? And there's a gap right now between, where the politicians are and where the strategy papers are. And this needs to be ironed out.
Okay. But has there been a fundamental change in Europe's position, or are we just...
Ukraine changed everything.
Okay.
Ukraine changed everything. And you will see a reassessment. And speaking about my own country, we had policy papers come out over the last years, too many probably on foreign policy. I think we had 4 over the last 6-7 years, something like that, which is a lot when you talk about foreign policy. And now we're going to have a new one, because our now foreign minister said very clearly, we need to have a much more realistic and pragmatic foreign policy. And we just can't do the policy we've thought we could do before, because it's not in tune with where the world is and where realities have moved. And I think that's true for a lot of European countries, and we haven't found, the perfect answer to that. There are, there's what I would call an emerging consensus in Europe, where 27 partners, it's a puzzle piece to get everything to come together. 28 when you count the Commission. So, it's really, how do we get those priorities aligned, and then once we have that, we can act very strongly and decisively. And we have done so when it comes to a lot of issues pertaining Ukraine.
Yes.
But the problem with Ukraine, or the challenge, I would rather say, that we're facing now is, yes, we know what we want to do now, but do we know what kind of end state we can agree to? And that's a problem for everyone.
Yeah.
You can also go to the U.S. and, what's the end state the U.S. look for? Nobody has a clue in Washington, frankly. And in Europe, we're also struggling with this. And that's going to be very important, because the end state will also be very informative on how Europe will position itself towards China. So I think it's going to be difficult for Europeans to agree 100% to how we're going to deal with China before we understand how will we deal with Russia in the post-Ukraine scenario.
Ambassador, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I wish we had more time, but that's all that we have for tonight. Before we go, maybe you'd like to leave a message to our audience?
Well, definitely. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I love being in the Philippines. I see a lot of opportunities for the Philippines. I think the Philippines has moved much more into the focus of Europe, of Denmark. The Philippines has a great baseline potential, but there's also work to be done. Cut the red tape, you have to deal with governance issues. You get those things right, I see a great future for the Philippines. Your neighbors have had their decades, it's the Philippines' turn now. Let's make this decade the Filipino decade. Thank you.
Very well said, Ambassador. Again, thank you very much. I'd like to thank also our viewers watching this program live and those watching the replay. I'd like to thank Pastor Apollo Kibuloy for making this program possible. This has been Business and Politics, and I will see you next week.